Everyone in my family had a reason they couldn't do it. Spouse, kids, distance. My reason, that I had a future worth protecting, apparently didn't count. Because I was 26 and single, my life was the cheapest to spend. My grandfather taught me to fish when I was 7 years old. Not just the mechanics of it, how to bait a hook, how to cast, how to wait, but the philosophy of it. The patience. The willingness to sit in silence with someone you love and let that silence mean something. He'd pour coffee from a thermos, hand me a juice box, and we'd sit at the edge of the lake behind his house for hours without speaking. I never thought of it as boring. I thought of it as the most important thing in the world. He came to every school play, every graduation. When my grandmother died 8 years ago, I was 18 and I didn't know how to hold that much grief. My grandfather drove 3 hours to sit with me. Not to fix anything. Not to say the right words. Just to sit. We went fishing the next morning, didn't catch anything, and he said, she would have laughed at us. And I laughed, and it was the first time I'd laughed in a week. That's the kind of man he is. That's the kind of bond we have. Which is why, when everything began to unravel, it felt like grief all over again. Different flavor. Same weight in the chest. I am 26 years old. I live in a one-bedroom apartment I bought 2 years ago. The first significant asset I've ever owned, the proof that the working, the saving, the grinding in my mid-20s had meant something. I have a career in project management, hybrid work, a life I've carefully constructed. I'm not rich. I'm not married. I have no kids. I am, by most measures, a young person just getting started. My grandfather is 84. And he is afraid. Part 1. The situation. The signs had been building for a year, at least. I'd noticed on my weekly visits, the mail piling up, the stove left on twice that I saw personally, the confusion about what day it was or whether he'd taken his blood pressure medication. He moved more slowly. The stairs in his house, the same stairs he'd climbed 10,000 times over 50 years, had become a negotiation. He'd grip the railing with both hands, lower himself carefully, and I'd pretend not to notice the effort it cost him so his pride could stay intact. He'd lived in that house since before my mother was born. Every corner of it held 50 years of life. My grandmother's china, the workbench where he'd taught me to fix a bicycle, the kitchen table where holiday meals had happened, photograph after photograph of people who were gone or scattered. It was not just a house. It was the physical evidence of his life. I understood why he couldn't imagine leaving it. But the house was too big for one frail man. 2 floors, a basement, a yard. Steps everywhere. The bathroom on the main floor had a tub, not a walk-in shower. The nearest hospital was 20 minutes away. The neighbors were friendly but elderly themselves. He was increasingly alone in a space designed for more people, more capacity, more safety than he now had. The family had begun, carefully, to discuss options. My mother, his daughter, had consulted with a geriatric care coordinator. 3 paths emerged. Option A. In-home care. Professional caregivers visiting daily, helping with mobility, medications, meals. About $3,000 to $4,000 a month, partially covered by his insurance. He could stay in his house, which mattered enormously to him. Option B. Assisted living. A private apartment in a facility with staff available, meals provided, activities, community. About $4,500 a month, also partially subsidized. More consistent oversight, less risk of a fall going unnoticed. Option C. Skilled nursing facility. Full-time care, more clinical setting, most appropriate for higher medical need. Similar cost, more intensive. All 3 options were viable. My grandfather had approximately $4,000 a month in pension and Social Security income, plus $80,000 in savings. Properly managed, he could fund professional care for 5 to 6 years minimum, probably longer. He was not facing financial crisis. He was facing the reality of aging, which is a different thing entirely. The family presented the options. My grandfather listened. And then he said no. Part 2. The demand. His rejection of professional care was not quiet. He had opinions about each option, all of them deeply felt, and he expressed them with the rhetorical force of a man who has been told his life is changing and refuses to accept the terms. In-home care, strangers in my home, touching my things, going through my kitchen. I don't want that. I've lived 70 years without strangers in my kitchen, and I'm not starting now. Assisted living, those places are waiting rooms for death. You check in and you don't check out. You lose everything, your privacy, your routine, your dignity. I've visited people in those places. I watched what happened to them. Nursing home, absolutely not. You might as well take me out to the woods and leave me there. The emotion in his objections was real. I don't want to flatten that. He wasn't being irrational for no reason. He was a man who had spent 8 decades valuing self-determination, who had built a life on his own terms, who had watched his wife die in a hospital bed surrounded by machines. The idea of surrendering control, of being processed by institutions, of becoming a patient rather than a person, it terrified him in a way that was entirely human and entirely understandable. What he wanted instead was this. He wanted me. He laid it out at the kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon in October. Coffee between us. The same table where everything important had always happened. Sell your apartment, he said. Move in here. Take care of me. The money from the sale covers my expenses and your life here. You work from home anyway. You can do your work and take care of me. When I go, you inherit this house. It's bigger than your apartment. You come out ahead. And I get to stay in my home, with family, with someone who loves me. Not a stranger. That's how it should be. Only blood should take care of blood. He said it simply. Like it was reasonable. Like it was obvious. I sat with it for a moment before I responded, because I loved him and I didn't want to hurt him and I needed to make sure I understood exactly what I was being asked. He was asking me to liquidate my apartment, my first real asset, the thing that represented my last 2 years of disciplined work, and move into his house in a town 2 hours from my job, my friends, my life. He was asking me to become his full-time caregiver while pretending I could maintain a career between meetings. He was framing the inheritance of a house I couldn't use, in a town where I didn't live, as compensation. And he was calling all of this love. I did the math on the drive home that night. My apartment was worth approximately $141,000. His care needs, medications, supplies, food, utilities, the inevitable increase in medical costs as his condition progressed, ran conservatively $30,000 a year. That money would last roughly 4 to 5 years. Then I would have no apartment, depleted savings, a career I'd been largely absent from for half a decade, and a grandfather who might still need years more care. Eventually, if I outlived him, I'd inherit a house in a town where I had no job, no community, and no way to rebuild what I'd dismantled. And this was the good scenario. The one where nothing went wrong. The one where his decline was slow and manageable, where I didn't burn out, where my employer tolerated my increasingly unreliable presence, where I didn't lose years of compounding retirement savings during the decade when those savings matter most. He said it was my duty. He said strangers were unacceptable. He said only blood should care for blood. What he meant, though I didn't say it to him yet, was, you should sacrifice your life for my preference. There were other options, professional care he could afford, family contribution distributed fairly. He was rejecting everything except my total surrender. That's not tradition. That's targeting. Part 3. The family meeting. I am the youngest of the relevant family members, and the only one without what everyone seemed to consider a legitimate reason to say no. My mother, his daughter, works full-time. My father has his own health concerns. She can't step away from either obligation. My uncle, his son, lives across the country. Logistically impractical. My cousin has 2 young children under 5. Can't add caregiving. Everyone had reasons. None of those reasons were questioned. None of them were scrutinized or weighed against the cost of what was being asked. They were simply accepted because they were the right kind of reasons, the kind that came with recognizable social weight. A spouse, children, distance, established life. My reason, that I had a career, a home, a future I was actively building, apparently did not have the same weight. Because I was 26 and single, my life was available for sacrifice. The person whose life was least established was, by the family's implicit logic, the person whose life mattered least. I called a family meeting and said it plainly. Grandfather needs care. He won't accept professional help. He wants me to sell my apartment, move in, and become his caregiver. I'm saying no. So I need to know what everyone else is offering, because this can't land entirely on me. The offers. My mother could visit on weekends, sometimes. My uncle could contribute financially, a few hundred a month, maybe more. My cousin could call more regularly. Nobody said, I'll sell my home and move in. Nobody said, I'll leave my job and become his caregiver. Nobody volunteered their assets or their career or their independence. Just weekend visits, phone calls, modest checks. The minimum. I looked around the table at this gathering of adults who loved my grandfather and said, you all have reasons you can't do this. Jobs. Spouses. Kids. Distance. My reason, that I have a life and a future I'm building, doesn't seem to count. Because I'm young and single, I'm the obvious sacrifice. But I'm not disposable. My apartment is years of work. My career is my future. I'm not burning those down because everyone else has more acceptable excuses. My mother pulled me aside afterward. She was not unsympathetic. She was exhausted, I could see that, and genuinely frightened for her father, and probably ashamed of what was being asked of me. But she said it anyway, "You're the only one who can do this." I understood what she meant. Practically, logistically, I was the most available. No spouse to object, no children to protect, closest proximity, most flexible work situation. But I heard what she didn't say: your life is the cheapest to spend. Update 1. The professional consultation. I needed to understand, from someone without a stake in the outcome, what I was actually being asked to sustain. I made an appointment with a geriatric care specialist, a professional who assessed care needs and helped families navigate options. I brought my notes. I asked her to be direct with me. She was. 24/7 family caregiving is one of the most demanding roles a person can take on, she said. Not because caregivers don't love the person they're caring for. Most of them love them deeply. But love doesn't protect you from burnout. Family caregivers show significantly higher rates of depression, anxiety, physical health decline, and career disruption than non-caregivers. The work is relentless, invisible, and escalating. What your grandfather needs today is not what he'll need in 2 years. Cognitive decline and mobility decline both tend to progress. The person who can currently redirect confusion will eventually need to manage wandering. The person who needs help with stairs will eventually need help with everything. She paused, then added something I've thought about many times since: professional care isn't abandonment. It's the appropriate response to needs that exceed what one person can sustainably provide. Most families experience significant guilt about facilities, and that guilt is understandable. But it often fades when they see their loved one receiving consistent, skilled, attentive care from people trained specifically for this work. The guilt assumes the family option is better. It isn't always. Sometimes it's significantly worse. I asked her about the financial picture. She confirmed what I'd calculated. My grandfather had sufficient resources for professional care without touching my apartment at all. The request for my apartment wasn't financial necessity. It was about preference, a specific, deeply felt preference for family care over professional care. That preference was understandable. It was also something he could afford not to impose on me. I left that appointment with a kind of terrible clarity. He could afford the care. He simply didn't want it. And his not wanting it was being translated, through family pressure and cultural weight and guilt, into my obligation to absorb it. The care specialist's words stayed with me. What he was asking wasn't love. It was a 10-year sentence to serve alone while everyone else kept their lives. The inheritance at the end wouldn't compensate for lost earning years, lost relationships, lost self. Update 2. The confrontation. I went back to my grandfather's house on a Tuesday evening in November. We sat at the kitchen table again. I had decided to be fully honest with him, not as an attack but as the only thing love actually required. I told him I loved him. I meant it without qualification. I told him I wanted to be involved in his care, more than I'd ever been. I would visit twice a week. I would manage his finances and coordinate his medical appointments. I would research caregivers with him, help him understand what modern in-home care actually looked like, help him find an arrangement that preserved as much of his independence and dignity as possible. I would be his advocate, his partner in figuring this out. But I would not sell my apartment. I would not become his 24/7 caregiver. That was my limit, and I needed him to understand why. If I do this, I said, I'm 36 when you go, with no assets, no career trajectory, no ability to rebuild. I've spent my prime earning years, the years when compound interest and career growth matter most, as a sole caregiver. I'm not saying that to be cruel. I'm saying it because it's true, and I need you to understand what you're asking. He was quiet for a long time. Then, your life, your career, your future. What about my life? I'm 84 years old. I have maybe a few years left. I'm asking you to give me those years, to be with me at the end, the way I was with you at the beginning. And you're worried about your career trajectory? When I changed your diapers, I didn't calculate what it would cost me. I just did it because you were family. That's what family does. I'd heard the diaper argument before. I'd been preparing for it. Grandpa, I said carefully, you chose to have children. You chose to be my grandfather. You chose to show up for every play, every graduation, every moment. Those were gifts you gave freely. You can't retroactively convert them into loans. I didn't ask to be born. I didn't sign a contract. What you did for me when I was helpless was love, given freely, with nothing owed in return. What you're asking me now is sacrifice. Those aren't the same thing." He didn't answer that. He brought out my grandmother instead. "Your grandmother would be ashamed. She always said family takes care of family. She'd never let me go to some facility. She'd want you here." The guilt was real. It landed. My grandmother had been a loving, warm presence in my life, and invoking her was effective because she had been wonderful. But she was also gone, and I had no way of knowing what she would want, and neither did he. He knew what he wanted. He was giving her credit for it. "I don't know what grandmother would want," I said. "Neither do you. You know what she believed in general. You're translating that belief into a specific demand. I loved her too. I don't think she'd want me to destroy my life. I don't think love, real love, asks for that." He invoked culture. Our background, our heritage, the American habit of warehousing the elderly and calling it efficient. "Has this country made you forget who you are?" "I haven't forgotten who I am," I said. "But who I am includes someone with a career and a home and a future. Taking care of my own doesn't mean destroying myself. And plenty of families in our tradition use professional care when they need it. This isn't cultural. This is you wanting a specific outcome, and I understand why you want it, but I can't be that outcome." I proposed the compromise: twice weekly visits, financial management, medical coordination, advocacy. Deep involvement. Real involvement. Everything except sole caregiving. He said, "Professional caregivers aren't family. I don't want strangers wiping me, feeding me, treating me like a patient. I want you. The boy I taught to fish. The boy who sat with me when your grandmother died. Not a minimum wage worker who doesn't know my name. You. Just you." The phrase "just you" sat in the room like something heavy. This was the moment I understood what he could not yet say. He was terrified. Not of care workers specifically. Not of the logistics. He was terrified of becoming invisible, of mattering to no one, of moving through his last years as a task on someone's shift schedule rather than as a grandfather, a person, a man who had lived a full life. He wanted to matter to someone who already loved him. He wanted the care to mean something beyond professional competence. That was real, and it was heartbreaking, and it did not change my answer. Update 3. The Ultimatum and its aftermath. My grandfather gave me his final position on a Sunday morning in December. "Then you're not my grandson." Not really. A real grandson wouldn't calculate costs. A real grandson wouldn't talk about limits. A real grandson would do what needs to be done. "If you won't do this, I don't want to see you. Stay away. Keep your apartment." "But you're dead to me." I drove home and did not cry until I was inside my front door. Then I sat on my kitchen floor and cried for a long time. The man who taught me to fish. The man who drove 3 hours to sit with me when my grandmother died. He had just looked at me and said I was dead to him because I would not sell my home and give him my life. I want to be fair to him. He was 84 and frightened, and he had just been told that the person he wanted most wasn't coming. He said an unforgivable thing. He said it from a place of fear rather than cruelty, though that doesn't make it stop hurting. I know the difference between a man being terrible and a man being terrified. I think he was the second. It didn't help much, in the moment. But it helped eventually. I stopped visiting. He refused to see me. And the family, confronted with the actual situation, grandfather alone, needs increasing, chosen caregiver having said no, was forced to arrange something. They hired in-home caregivers. My grandfather, the man who had declared professional care unacceptable, who had said he'd rather die than accept strangers in his house, accepted it. Not cheerfully. Not without complaint. But he accepted it because there was no other option available. His leverage had been the implicit threat that I would cave if pushed hard enough, and when I didn't, reality rushed in to fill the space. I heard from my mother that he complained about the caregivers constantly at first. Then, around the 3rd week, he learned the name of the woman who helped him in the mornings. By the 2nd month, he asked her about her children. Somewhere in there, she became a person to him rather than a stranger, and the stranger became, cautiously, someone he trusted. I was seeing a therapist by then. Not just for this, for the accumulated weight of the previous months, the guilt, the family pressure, the dislocation of being told you were dead to someone who meant everything to you. The therapist said something I wrote down. Caregiving is a gift, not an obligation. You can give what you can give without giving everything. Your grandfather wanted everything. You offered what was sustainable. He rejected it. That was his choice, not your failure. I am still working on believing that fully. but I believe it more each month. Update 4. The Fall. In August, 8 months after the ultimatum, my grandfather fell. He was trying to get to the bathroom at night without waking the overnight caregiver, a gesture of independence, or pride, or maybe just old habit, and he went down on the stairs. Hip fracture. Surgery. A week in the hospital, then rehabilitation. I found out through my mother and drove to the hospital without deciding to, without thinking it through. I just went. He was in a bed with monitors and N4 and a look on his face that I recognized as embarrassment, the kind that comes from needing help you didn't want to need, from being undignified in front of someone you love. I said terrible things, he said, when I pulled the chair up. You did, I said. I didn't soften it. Silence. The kind we'd always been good at. I'm still not selling my apartment, I said. Something shifted in his face. Not quite a smile. Something more complicated. I know, he said. I know. I was scared. I am scared. But I shouldn't have asked you to give up your life. I was trying to hold on to something. I was trying to hold on to you. A pause. I'm sorry. It wasn't full reconciliation. It was one honest moment between two people who had hurt each other, finding their way back to the same side of the table. After the rehabilitation stay, it was clear the house was no longer viable. The stairs alone made it impossible. My mother and uncle and I spent 3 weekends helping him choose an assisted living facility, the thing he had sworn, with absolute certainty, he would never accept. We found one that had a proper feeling to it, not clinical, not warehouse-like, a place with a common room where people played cards and a dining hall that served actual food and staff who learned residents' names. He moved in on a rainy Saturday in September. He brought his photographs and his workbench tools and his coffee thermos, and the staff helped him arrange his room until it looked, partially, like the life he'd left. He hated it for the first 2 weeks. He told me so on every phone call. By the 3rd week, he'd found 2 men he could talk to at breakfast. By the 5th week, he was playing cards 3 times a week. By the 2nd month, he told me the food was better than expected, which from him is approximately equivalent to a Michelin star review. Resolution. What actually happened? This is what Wednesday evenings look like now. I drive to the facility after work. I sign in at the front desk, where the receptionist knows my name and sometimes has messages from my grandfather. Tell him to bring those cookies, not the other ones. I find him in the common room, usually at the card table, usually with the same 2 men he's decided are acceptable company. He sees me come in. He waves me over. He says to whoever is there, "This is my grandson, the one who visits every week. Good boy." No mention of the apartment. No mention of the ultimatum. No mention of the 8 months of silence, the terrible words, the things we said and didn't say. Just grandfather, proud of his grandson, in the facility he swore he'd never accept. I stay for dinner. The food is decent. The staff know his name and his preferences. He likes his coffee black. He watches the evening news. He'll complain about the news but watch it anyway. He doesn't like being touched on the shoulder as a greeting. They know all of this. They care for him with consistency and skill and patience that I could not have maintained, not over months and years, not without losing myself in the process. Last week he told me about the aide who helps him in the mornings, the same one he'd been suspicious of at the beginning. He said she reminded him of my grandmother in some obscure way he couldn't articulate. He said it like it was a compliment. Like he'd arrived at something true. The catastrophe he predicted never happened. The abandonment he feared looks like community. The strangers he refused became people he knows by name, whose lives he is curious about, who have become, in their way, part of his daily world. My apartment is still mine. My career is intact. I have, in the past year, received a promotion that I would have been unavailable for as a full-time caregiver. My retirement savings are compounding. My life, the life he asked me to dismantle, is continuing. Reflection. He said, only blood should care for blood. But what he meant was, you should sacrifice your life for my preference. There were other options, professional care he could afford, family contribution distributed fairly. He rejected everything except my total surrender. That's not tradition. That's targeting. I asked the family what they'd contribute. My mother offered weekend visits. My uncle offered money. My cousin offered phone calls. Nobody offered to sell their home and move in. Just me, the 26-year-old without a spouse to object or kids to protect. The one whose life seemed most available for sacrifice. He said he changed my diapers as if that created a debt for elder care. But I didn't ask to be born. He chose to be my grandfather. Those weren't loans, they were gifts. You can't retroactively convert love into invoices. What he did for me was choice. What he wanted from me was obligation. Different things. The care specialist said family caregivers experience burnout, health problems, career destruction. What he was asking wasn't love, it was a 10-year sentence to serve alone while everyone else kept their lives. The inheritance at the end wouldn't compensate for lost earning years, lost relationships, lost self. He could afford professional care, $4,000 a month in income, $80,000 in savings. The need for my apartment wasn't financial necessity. It was about preference. He wanted me specifically, not because he needed me specifically, but because strangers felt undignified. My whole life for his dignity preferences. He called me dead to him for saying no. 8 months later, after a fall and hip surgery, he apologized. He's in assisted living now, the thing he swore he'd never accept. He accepts it fine. He plays cards. He has breakfast friends. He tells me the food is better than expected. All that drama, all that guilt, all that ultimatum, and the unacceptable option became his actual life. He's okay. I'm okay. The apartment is still mine. Sometimes people fight hardest against what they end up accepting anyway. My grandfather asked me to sell my apartment, move into his house, and become his full-time caregiver. He said it was my duty. He said only blood should care for blood. He said strangers were unacceptable, facilities were death sentences, and I was the only option. He said I was dead to him when I refused. Now he lives in assisted living, the place he swore he'd never accept. He plays cards with other residents. He knows the staff by name. He told me last week the food is better than expected. The catastrophe he predicted never happened. The abandonment he feared looks like community. My apartment is still mine. My career is intact. My future is buildable. And my grandfather is cared for, by professionals who do this well, consistently, without burning out. By people trained for exactly this. By a system that, for all its imperfection, works better than one exhausted 26-year-old could have worked alone. Sometimes the thing we fight hardest against is the thing we end up accepting. Sometimes only blood isn't the best care, just the most symbolic. I love my grandfather. I visit every week. I stay for dinner. I tell him about work and he pretends to understand what I do, and we drink coffee, and sometimes we sit in comfortable silence the way we did at the lake when I was 7, and neither of us needs to speak for it to mean something. I didn't sell my home to prove it. I didn't destroy my future to demonstrate loyalty. I said no to an unreasonable demand, and we both survived it. That's not betrayal. That's boundaries. Sometimes boundaries let everyone live.